I am Dominic, 62 years old, and for decades I worked tirelessly to give my son Marcus everything. But last month at his birthday party, he slapped me 20 times in front of his wife and friends. The humiliation burned deeper than the physical pain. So I made a decision that shocked everyone, including myself. I sold his house while he was at work. Before I tell you my story, let me know where you're watching from. Hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever had to teach someone a difficult lesson about respect. Trust me, this story has twists you won't believe. Growing up, my father always told me that a man's worth is measured by how well he provides for his family. I took that lesson to heart when I started working in construction at the age of 20. For 40 years, I climbed scaffoldings, poured concrete, and built structures that would outlast me. My hands grew calloused, my back permanently bent forward from carrying heavy loads, but I never complained. It was honest work that put food on the table for my wife Linda and our son Marcus. Linda and I married young. We were high school sweethearts who knew from the beginning that we wanted to build a life together. She was a kindergarten teacher, patient and kind with children. When Marcus was born, we were overjoyed. Our family felt complete. But life has a way of testing your strength when you least expect it. When Marcus turned 12, Linda was diagnosed with aggressive breast cancer. The doctors gave her 6 months. She fought bravely for 9, but in the end, cancer took her anyway. I still remember holding her hand as she slipped away, whispering that I would take care of our boy. And I did. After Linda died, I threw myself into being both mother and father to Marcus. I picked up extra shifts to make sure we could maintain our lifestyle. The foreman at the construction company understood my situation and gave me first pick on overtime. Some weeks I worked 70 hours, coming home so exhausted I could barely eat dinner before collapsing into bed. But on weekends, I was fully present for Marcus, attending his soccer games, helping with science projects, teaching him to change the oil in our old pickup truck. Dating again never seriously crossed my mind. A few friends tried to set me up, and there was one woman at the hardware store who would always find a reason to chat when I came in. But I would look at Marcus, see Linda's eyes looking back at me, and know that he needed all of me. There would be time for companionship later, I thought. Marcus was a bright kid. By high school, he was making straight A's and talking about college. I hadn't gone myself, having started working right after high school, but I wanted more for him. We sat at the kitchen table looking at brochures from different universities, calculating costs and making plans. I started putting aside even more money, cutting back on everything non-essential. My work boots got resold 3 times before I bought new ones. Our TV was ancient, but it worked fine. What mattered was the college fund that grew month by month. When Marcus got accepted to State University with a partial scholarship, I couldn't have been prouder. The night before he left for college, we sat on the porch of our modest home drinking beer. It wasn't strictly legal, him being only 18, but it seemed like the right father-son moment. "Dad," he said, looking at me seriously, "I know how much you've given up for me. I'm going to make it worth it, I promise." I clapped him on the shoulder. "You already have son, just by being who you are." College changed Marcus, but in ways that seemed positive. He became more confident, more ambitious. He studied business and finance subjects that mystified me but clearly engaged his mind. When he came home for holidays, he would talk excitedly about investment strategies and market trends. I nodded along, not always understanding, but happy to see his passion. During his senior year, Marcus met Sophia. She was studying marketing, smart and pretty with a warm laugh. The first time he brought her home, I saw how his eyes followed her around the room, and I recognized that look. It was how I had looked at Linda. When Marcus told me he was planning to propose after graduation, I gave him Linda's engagement ring. It had been her mother's before her, a simple diamond that caught the light beautifully. Their wedding was small but elegant. I gave a toast that made Marcus tear up, something rare for my stoic son. Watching them dance their first dance as husband and wife, I felt a deep contentment. Linda would have been so proud of the man our son had become. That night, as I drove back to my empty house, I felt a sense of completion. I had fulfilled my promise to Linda. Our son was educated, married to a woman he loved, and ready to start his own journey. After graduation, Marcus landed a job at a financial firm downtown. The starting salary made my eyebrows rise more than I was making after decades in construction. But I wasn't jealous, just proud. This was what I had worked for, wasn't it? For my son to have opportunities I never did. The changes in Marcus happened so gradually that at first I barely noticed them. The phone calls became less frequent, from twice a week to once, then to occasional texts checking in. When I visited their first apartment, a modern place downtown, Marcus seemed happy to see me but also slightly distracted, checking his phone during our conversations. Within 2 years at his company, Marcus received a significant promotion. He started dressing differently, expensive suits replacing the casual clothes he had worn in college. His haircut cost more than I spent on groceries in a week. Sophia, too, transformed from the down-to-earth girl I had met into someone more polished, more concerned with appearances. They moved from their apartment to a house in Oakwood Heights, an exclusive neighborhood with manicured lawns and luxury cars in every driveway. The first time I visited, driving my 15-year-old pickup truck down those pristine streets, I felt conspicuously out of place. Marcus had texted the gate code to get into the community, and the security guard had given my vehicle a suspicious once-over before letting me through. The house was beautiful, I had to admit. 2 stories with a 3-car garage, open-concept living areas, and a backyard with a built-in pool. Marcus gave me a tour, proudly pointing out the custom cabinetry in the kitchen and the surround sound system hidden in the walls. "This is really something, son," I said, trying to sound enthusiastic, while calculating how many years of my salary it would take to afford just the down payment on such a place. "We're moving up in the world, Dad," Marcus replied with a grin. "Sophia and I are thinking about starting a family soon. We wanted space for kids to grow." The thought of grandchildren warmed my heart. Maybe this was why they needed such a big house to fill it with the next generation. I pushed aside the slight discomfort I felt at the obvious display of wealth and focused on the positive. My son was successful. What father wouldn't be proud? But along with the new house came new friends, colleagues from Marcus's firm and their partners. They would have dinner parties where the wine cost more than I spent on food in a month. When I was invited, which became increasingly rare, I felt like an anthropologist studying a foreign culture. They discussed vacation homes, investment portfolios, and private schools for children not yet born. One Saturday, I decided to surprise Marcus and Sophia with a visit. I had found some old photo albums while cleaning out the attic, and thought Marcus might enjoy looking through them with his wife. I didn't call ahead, which was my first mistake. When I rang the doorbell, I could hear laughter and music from inside. Marcus answered, his smile faltering slightly when he saw me. "Dad, I didn't know you were coming by today. Thought I'd surprise you," I said, holding up the photo albums. "Found these in the attic. Lots of pictures of you as a kid." Marcus glanced behind him. "We actually have some friends over right now." "Oh, I won't stay long," I assured him. "Just wanted to drop these off." He hesitated, then stepped back to let me in. The living room was filled with people around Marcus and Sophia's age, all dressed casually, but in clothes that screamed money. Conversation halted briefly as I entered curious eyes, taking in my worn jeans and flannel shirt. "Everyone, this is my dad, Dominic," Marcus said, his voice just a touch too hearty. Dad, these are friends from work and the neighborhood. I waved awkwardly. A few people nodded politely before resuming their conversations. Sophia came over, kissing my cheek and taking the albums. "These are wonderful, Dominic, thank you," she said. "Can I get you a drink? We have some lovely Pinot Noir open." I accepted the wine but felt immediately out of place. Standing in a corner, I watched Marcus move among his friends with an ease I had never possessed in social situations. He seemed like a different person, laughing at inside jokes, discussing restaurants I could never afford to eat at. "So you're Marcus's father," said a man who had introduced himself as Blake. "He mentioned you worked in construction. 40 years, I said with a touch of pride. "Helped build half the skyline downtown." "Fascinating," Blake replied in a tone that suggested it was anything but. "Must have been grueling work." "Honest work," I corrected gently. "Never bothered me to get my hands dirty." Blake's eyes flicked down to my hands, the permanent calluses and slightly bent fingers from years of physical labor. "Yes, well, thankfully Marcus found a different path. Though I suppose we need people in all sorts of professions." Before I could respond to the condescension barely hidden in his comment, he had moved on to join another conversation. I finished my wine and made excuses to leave shortly after the photo albums left behind on a side table where they looked out of place among sleek design books. As I was getting in my truck, I overheard Marcus and Sophia talking near their front door, not realizing I could still hear them. "You could have called to tell me he was coming," Sophia was saying. "I didn't know," Marcus replied. "He just showed up. Blake was asking if your dad always dresses like that." Marcus sighed audibly. "What am I supposed to do? He's from a different world. He doesn't fit in with our friends, Sophia." "I know, but he's your father. Maybe we should have dinner with just him next weekend." "Fine, but not here. Let's meet him somewhere downtown." I started my truck loudly, then not wanting to hear more. As I pulled away, I saw Marcus wave from the doorway, a smile fixed on his face that didn't reach his eyes. Driving home, I told myself not to be hurt. Marcus had worked hard for his success. It was natural that he would gravitate toward people who shared his lifestyle and interests. Every father wants his son to surpass him, right? I had just never expected the distance between us to feel so vast. Still, I made excuses for him. He was busy building his career, possibly starting a family soon. The occasional lunch downtown was enough, I told myself. I didn't need to be central to his life anymore. That's how it should be with grown children. They move on, build their own lives. But the ache remained a dull throb in my chest whenever I thought about how eagerly Marcus had once shared everything with me, and how carefully he now seemed to compartmentalize his life, keeping me firmly in a box labeled past, while he raced toward his future. Our family home wasn't much by most standards, but it meant everything to me. A modest two-bedroom ranch-style house on the edge of town, it had been in my family for 3 generations. My grandfather built it with his own hands in the 1940s, after returning from the war. My father grew up there, added the back porch and garage, and eventually passed it down to me. It was where I brought Linda as a nervous new bride, where we raised Marcus, and where I continued to live alone after she passed. The house sat on a quarter-acre lot with mature oak trees that provided welcome shade in summer. The kitchen had been updated only once in the 1980s, the appliances functional but dated. The hardwood floors creaked in specific spots that I could navigate blindfolded after decades of midnight trips to the bathroom. It wasn't fancy, but every corner held memories. The height marks on the kitchen doorframe tracking Marcus's growth. The slight dent in the living room wall from when 8-year-old Marcus had tried to practice baseball indoors despite my warnings. I maintained it meticulously, handling small repairs myself and saving for the occasional bigger project. The roof was relatively new, replaced 5 years earlier, when a storm had damaged the original. The furnace was reliable, if not the most efficient. I had plans to eventually remodel the bathroom, which still had its original 1940s tile, but it had never seemed urgent. When Marcus called me out of the blue one Wednesday evening, his voice had that particular excited quality I recognized from childhood Christmas mornings. "Dad, I've found it. The perfect house. It's in Lakeview Estates, right on the water. 5 bedrooms, home, office, gourmet kitchen, everything Sophia and I want for our growing family." My heart lifted at the implication they might be expecting. "That's wonderful, son. Sophia's pregnant." "Not yet," Marcus clarified quickly. "But we're planning to start trying soon, and we want to be settled first. The thing is," his voice dropped slightly, "the sellers have another offer. We need to move fast if we want this place, and we're a little short on the down payment." I felt a familiar tightening in my chest. Marcus hadn't asked me for money since college. "How short are we talking?" He named a figure that made me blink. It was more than I made in a year. "I know it's a lot," Marcus continued hurriedly, "but this opportunity won't come around again. Property values in Lakeview are only going up. It's an investment in our future, in your grandkids' future." "I'd need to think about it, son," I said carefully. "That's not the kind of cash I have sitting around." There was a pause on the line. "What about the house? Your house must be worth a decent amount now with the way the market has gone up. And it's just you there, Dad. All that space for one person." I looked around at the living room where we were speaking, seeing it suddenly through Marcus's eyes. Old-fashioned, small, a relic. But it was my home filled with the ghosts of happier times. "You're asking me to sell the house your grandfather built where you grew up. I'm not saying you have to." Marcus backpedaled slightly. "Just that it might make sense. You could get a nice condo, something easier to maintain at your age. And Sophia and I would have our dream home. Everyone wins." At my age, the words stung more than they should have. I was 62, not 82. Still, the idea had taken root. The house did feel empty sometimes, echoing with memories rather than current life. And if it meant my future grandchildren would grow up in a beautiful home on the lake. "Let me sleep on it," I told him. That night, I couldn't sleep. I walked through each room of the house, touching door frames, running my hands along the countertops, worn smooth by decades of use. In Marcus's old room now, a rarely used guest room, I sat on the bed and remembered reading him bedtime stories, nursing him through fevers, helping with homework. Was I being selfish, holding on to a house too large for one person when my son wanted to start his own family traditions? By morning, I had made my decision. I called Marcus. "I'll do it," I said. "I'll sell the house and give you the money for the down payment." Marcus's gratitude was effusive. He promised this would be an investment in our family's future. But as the conversation continued, a new idea emerged. "Actually, Dad, what if we put the new house in both our names? You'd be contributing a significant portion of the purchase price. It would protect your investment." It made sense financially, though I had been prepared to simply give him the money. We agreed I would own 50% on paper, though Marcus and Sophia would live there and handle all the costs of maintenance taxes and the mortgage. It seemed like the perfect solution. Everything moved quickly after that. The real estate market was hot, and my well-maintained, if outdated, family home sold within a week for more than I had expected. I found a small 2-bedroom apartment in a complex for seniors, not fancy, but comfortable and practical. The leftover money after paying off my modest remaining mortgage went directly to Marcus's down payment. The day of the closing for Marcus's new lakefront home, I met him and Sophia at the title company office. The mortgage broker slid document after document across the table for signatures. Marcus signed rapidly, barely scanning the content. I was more careful reading each page, which seemed to irritate the broker, who had other appointments waiting. This one confirms that you, Mr. Dominic Walsh, and your son Marcus Walsh are co-owners with right of survivorship, the broker explained, pushing a particularly dense document toward me. Essentially, you each own 50%, and if one owner passes away, the other automatically inherits the full ownership. I nodded, scanning the legal language. Marcus drummed his fingers on the table. "Dad, we've been over this with Frank," he said, referring to the family lawyer who had advised us on the arrangement. "It's all standard." "Just being thorough, son," I replied mildly, signing my name where indicated. Frank had indeed reviewed the documents with me earlier. Though I trusted Marcus completely, Frank had insisted on certain protections. "Family is family, but business is business," he had said. "This protects everyone." One key protection was that either owner could sell their share at any time without the other's permission. Frank had explained this was standard in co-ownership arrangements, preventing one owner from being trapped in the property. I had thought little of it at the time, assuming our arrangement would continue indefinitely. After the closing, we all drove to the new house for a small celebration. It was indeed beautiful, with soaring ceilings and walls of windows overlooking the lake. Marcus and Sophia walked me through each room, describing their plans for furniture placement and decor. The master suite was larger than my entire new apartment. One of the bedrooms was already being planned as a nursery, painted a gentle yellow that would work for a boy or girl. As we toasted with champagne on the back deck, watching the sunset over the lake, I felt a mix of emotions. Pride in being able to help my son achieve his dreams, nostalgia for the humble family home I had just sold, and a small, nagging doubt about whether I had made the right decision. But seeing Marcus and Sophia so happy pushed the doubt aside. This was what parents did right. Sacrifice for their children's happiness. "To new beginnings," Marcus said, raising his glass. "And family traditions," I added, trying not to think about the traditions being left behind in the old house now belonging to strangers. That night in my new apartment, surrounded by boxes yet to be unpacked, I reminded myself that home wasn't about the building, but the people you love. I had given Marcus a gift that would benefit generations to come. What more could a father want? The invitation to Marcus's 35th birthday party came via a formal email rather than a phone call. It was to be held at their lakefront home on a Saturday evening, cocktail attire suggested. I bought a new sport coat for the occasion, my first clothing splurge in years, wanting to fit in better with Marcus's sophisticated friends. The evening of the party, I arrived right on time with a carefully wrapped gift, a vintage watch that had belonged to my father. It wasn't expensive by Marcus's standards, but it had sentimental value, and I hoped he would appreciate the family connection. The house was transformed. Professional lighting highlighted the architectural features, floral arrangements, adorned every surface, and staff in black uniforms circulated with trays of appetizers and champagne. At least 50 people filled the space, their voices creating a constant hum of conversation, punctuated by occasional laughter. Marcus greeted me at the door with a brief hug. "Dad, glad you could make it. You remember Blake and his wife Jennifer?" He gestured to the couple I had met at their previous house, the man who had been condescending about my construction career. I nodded politely, shaking hands. "Nice to see you again." "Dominic," Blake said, his smile not reaching his eyes. "Marcus was just telling us about the property investments he's considering. Quite the financial mind your son has." "He gets his smarts from his mother," I said, trying to be gracious. "I'm just a blue-collar guy who knows which end of a hammer to hold." Blake laughed too loudly. "Refreshing honesty. If you'll excuse us, I see the Hendersons just arrived. Dominic, help yourself to the bar. I believe they have some excellent whiskey that might be to your taste. The slight emphasis on your taste didn't escape me, but I smiled and thanked him. As they walked away, I stood awkwardly for a moment before making my way to the bar. The bartender, a young man with a carefully trimmed beard, raised his eyebrows questioningly. Just a beer, please. Whatever you have on tap. We're only serving wine and specialty cocktails tonight, sir, he replied. Perhaps a Cabernet? That'll be fine, I said, taking the glass he poured and moving toward a quieter corner of the room. For the next hour, I observed the party more than participated in it. Sophia flitted from group to group, the perfect hostess in a designer dress that probably cost more than my monthly rent. Marcus worked the room like a politician, clearly in his element among the wealthy and powerful. Occasionally, someone would engage me in brief conversation, usually beginning with, "So you're Marcus's father," before politely extracting themselves after a few minutes. Dinner was served at round tables set up in the backyard, which had been transformed with string lights and lanterns. I was seated with several older couples who turned out to be parents of Marcus's colleagues. We found common ground, discussing our children's achievements and the challenges of modern grandparenting. After dinner, everyone moved back inside for cake and speeches. Marcus stood on the staircase, landing Sophia at his side as various friends offered toasts. They recalled college adventures, career milestones, and inside jokes that made the crowd laugh appreciatively, while I smiled along without understanding the references. When the formal speeches concluded, the party loosened up. Music played from hidden speakers, and the bar saw increased activity. I found myself near a display of framed photos chronicling Marcus's life. Many I had taken myself pictures of his graduation, his wedding vacations we had shared. It touched me that these memories were prominently displayed. As I was looking at the photos, a server passed with a tray of red wine. I reached for a glass just as someone bumped into me from behind. The wine sloshed over the rim of the glass, several drops landing on the cream-colored area rug beneath our feet. "Oh no," I said, immediately setting down the glass and reaching for a napkin from a nearby table. "I'm so sorry about that." The server assured me it wasn't a problem and hurried off to get something to clean the spot. I knelt down, blotting at the small stain with my napkin, when I heard Marcus's voice behind me. "What happened?" His tone was sharp, concerned. "Just a little spill," I said, standing up. "Nothing major. The server's getting something to clean it." Marcus looked down at the rug, his expression darkening. "That's a hand-knotted Ushak rug, Dad. It cost $20,000. I blinked, unable to fathom spending that amount on something people walked on. "I'm sorry. It was an accident. Just a few drops. This is exactly why we can't have nice things around you," Marcus said, his voice rising slightly. Several nearby conversations paused as people turned to look. "You don't understand the value of things." "Marcus." Sophia appeared at his side, placing a warning hand on his arm. "It's just a rug. It can be cleaned." But something had snapped in Marcus. Whether it was the alcohol he had consumed or stress I didn't know about, his face flushed with anger. "No, Sophia, this is more than the rug. It's about respect for our home, for the things we've worked for." I said I was sorry. I repeated, aware that more people were watching now. "It was an accident." "An accident." Marcus mimicked his voice, taking on a nasty edge I had never heard before. "Just like it was an accident when you tracked mud all over the marble foyer last Christmas, or when you used a metal fork on our non-stick pans. You don't belong in a house like this, Dad. You don't know how to behave around quality things." The room had gone silent. I felt heat rising in my face, embarrassment and hurt battling for dominance. "Son, you're making a scene." We can talk about this later. Now we're talking about it, Marcus said, stepping closer to me. His eyes, so like his mother's, were cold in a way that broke my heart. You know what your problem is. You never evolved. You're stuck in the same mindset, same clothes, same everything as 30 years ago. It's embarrassing. Marcus, that's enough, Sophia said firmly, trying to pull him away. He shook her off. No, he needs to hear this. Do you know what my colleagues think when they meet you? They wonder how someone like me could come from someone like you. They question my judgment, because clearly my own father doesn't understand the world I live in. Each word struck like a physical blow. I stood frozen, unable to believe this was my son speaking, the boy I had sacrificed everything for. I think you've had too much to drink, I finally said quietly. I'm going to go, and we can talk when you're sober. I turned to leave, but Marcus grabbed my arm, spinning me back to face him. And then, in a moment that would replay in my nightmares for weeks to come, he slapped me across the face. Hard. The sound cracked through the silent room. Someone gasped. I was so shocked I didn't move, didn't speak. Marcus's face contorted with rage I couldn't understand. You don't walk away from me, he said, and slapped me again. And again. I lost count after the fifth slap. They came in rapid succession, left cheek, right cheek, each one stinging more than the last. I didn't raise my hands to defend myself. Couldn't. This was my son, my boy. Even as tears sprang to my eyes from the physical pain, the emotional agony was far worse. Marcus, stop it! Sophia screamed, trying to pull him away. You're hurting him. Other guests finally intervened, two men grabbing Marcus and restraining him. His face was twisted, unrecognizable. 20 years I've wanted to do that, he spat. 20 years of being embarrassed by you, of having to explain away my low-class father. I touched my cheek, feeling the heat of what would surely become bruises. Without a word, I turned and walked to the front door. Behind me, I could hear Sophia crying, guests murmuring in shock, someone saying they should call a cab for Marcus. In my car, I sat for several long minutes, hands shaking too badly to insert the key in the ignition. When I finally managed to start the engine and pull away from the curb, I glanced in my rearview mirror. Several guests were leaving early, faces grim. The perfect birthday party ruined. But all I could think about was the stranger my son had become, and how I had failed so completely as a father to raise a man who could do what Marcus had just done. The first few days after the party, I barely left my apartment. My face bore the visible marks of Marcus's attack, a constellation of bruises in various shades of purple and yellow. I told the concerned neighbor who asked what happened that I had fallen. The lie tasted bitter in my mouth, but the truth was too shameful to share. Sleep eluded me. I would lie awake, replaying the scene, trying to understand how my son could have so much rage toward me. Had I been blind to his resentment all these years? Were there signs I had missed opportunities to bridge the growing gulf between us that I had failed to take on the third day? My phone chimed with a text message from Marcus. I'm sorry about losing control. Things got out of hand. Not, I'm sorry for hitting you. Not, I'm sorry for humiliating you in front of everyone. Just sorry for losing control, as if the real problem was his lack of restraint, rather than the profound disrespect he had shown. I didn't respond. A week passed. The bruises faded, but the internal wound remained raw and throbbing. I went through the motions of daily life, grocery shopping, doctor's appointment, even a movie at the senior center. But I felt hollow inside. The son I had raised, had sacrificed for, had given everything to saw me as an embarrassment. A failure. Someone not worthy of basic human respect. One sleepless night I found myself looking through old photo albums. Marcus as a toothless 6-year-old grinning proudly with his first caught fish. Marcus at 16 washing the car, laughing as I sprayed him with the hose. Marcus in his cap and gown, arm around my shoulder, both of us beaming at the camera. Where was that boy now? When had he transformed into the angry, entitled man who had struck his father 20 times in front of a crowd? The question that kept returning, gnawing at me like a hungry animal, was whether I had enabled this transformation. In my determination to give Marcus everything, had I failed to teach him the most important lessons: gratitude, humility, respect? Had my sacrifices somehow communicated that I was less valuable, less worthy of respect? On the 10th day after the party, I received a small package from Sophia. Inside was a handwritten note. "Dominic, I am so deeply sorry for what happened. There is no excuse for Marcus's behavior. He is seeing a therapist now to address his anger issues and alcohol use. I hope someday you can forgive him. With love, Sophia." Beneath the note was a framed photo I had never seen before of me holding newborn Marcus in the hospital. Linda looking up at us from her bed with exhausted joy. The simple gift broke something in me. I sat on my couch and wept for the first time since the party, great heaving sobs that seemed to come from the depths of my soul. When the tears finally subsided, I felt a clarity I had been lacking. This wasn't just about one drunken outburst at a party. This was about a pattern that had developed over years of Marcus taking and me giving without the balance of respect that should accompany such a relationship. I had become a doormat, and doormats get walked on. The next morning, I called Frank, the family lawyer, who had handled the house purchase. Frank had been a friend since high school, one of the few people who had stayed in touch over the years, despite our different career paths. "Dominic," he greeted me warmly. "Good to hear from you. How's the new place?" "It's fine, Frank. Listen, I need to talk to you about the house. Marcus's house." I explained the situation, including the birthday party incident. Frank listened without interrupting his lawyer's training, evident in his patience. "Jesus, Dom," he said when I finished. "That's assault. You could press charges." "I'm not going to do that to my son," I said firmly. "But I am reconsidering our arrangement with the house." "You're thinking of selling your half?" "Yes. I want to know my options." Frank sighed. "Well, as we discussed when we set this up, either owner can sell their share without the other's permission. That was built into the agreement. But typically, the other owner gets right of first refusal, meaning Marcus would have the opportunity to buy your share before you could sell to a third party. And if he doesn't have the money to buy me out, then you can sell to anyone willing to become a co-owner with your son." I considered this. How would that work practically if I sold to a stranger? "It gets complicated," Frank admitted. "The new owner would have equal rights to the property. They couldn't evict Marcus since he owns the other half and has established residency, but they could potentially force a sale of the entire property through a partition action." "I want to move forward," I said decisively, "but I need this handled delicately. Can you help me?" Frank agreed to represent me. Over the next few days, we developed a plan. First, he would formally notify Marcus of my intention to sell, giving him the option to purchase my half at fair market value. Given the substantial equity in the property and Marcus's existing mortgage, it seemed unlikely he would have the liquid assets to exercise this option. If, as expected, Marcus declined or failed to respond, within the legally required time frame, Frank would quietly find a buyer for my half. He had a client, a real estate investor named Richard Thompson, who specialized in unusual property arrangements and might be interested. "Thompson has a reputation for being fair but firm," Frank explained. "He doesn't want to be a permanent co-owner. His goal would be to force a sale of the entire property, splitting the proceeds according to ownership percentage. Would Marcus and Sophia have to move out immediately? I asked, concerned despite everything. Not immediately. These things take time to work through the courts. They'd have months, possibly a year, to make arrangements. And of course, they'd receive half the proceeds from any sale, which would be substantial, given the property values in that neighborhood. I nodded, still conflicted, but increasingly certain this was the right course of action. Not out of vengeance, but because the current arrangement had become poisonous. Marcus needed to understand that actions had consequences, that relationships required mutual respect. The formal notice was sent by certified mail to Marcus and Sophia. 3 days later, I received a furious phone call from my son. "What the hell is this, Dad?" he demanded without preamble. "You're selling your half of our house." "I'm exercising my legal right as co-owner," I replied, keeping my voice steady despite my racing heart. "The arrangement isn't working for me anymore. Because of one mistake, one bad night when I'd had too much to drink, you're going to potentially make your own son homeless." "It wasn't one mistake, Marcus," I said quietly. "It was the culmination of years of disrespect. And you won't be homeless. You'll have half the proceeds from any sale, more than enough to buy another home." "We don't want another home. We love this house. Sophia has already started decorating the nursery." The implication that Sophia was pregnant gave me pause, but only briefly. "If she's pregnant, congratulations. All the more reason for you to reflect on the kind of father you want to be, the kind of example you want to set." "This is about money, isn't it?" Marcus's tone turned sly. "You're feeling financial pressure in retirement. We can work something out, a monthly payment maybe." "It's not about money, son. It's about respect. Something you seem to have forgotten." And the conversation devolved from there, with Marcus cycling through anger bargaining and finally threats of legal action. I remained calm, referring him to Frank for any further communication. After hanging up, I sat heavily on my couch, emotionally drained but oddly peaceful. For the first time in years, perhaps decades, I had stood up for myself, had established a boundary with my son. Whatever happened next, I would face it, knowing I had acted not out of malice, but out of a belated sense of self-preservation. I chose a Wednesday for the final signing of the papers, knowing from Sophia's social media that Marcus had a business trip to Chicago that day. It seemed kinder somehow to spare him the immediate confrontation, to give him time to process what had happened before, having to face it directly. Frank had arranged for us to meet Richard Thompson and his wife Janet at the title company office downtown. The Thompsons were in their early 50s, successful in real estate investments, but unpretentious in their manner. Richard wore a golf shirt and khakis rather than a suit, and Janet brought homemade cookies to the signing, passing them around to everyone, including the notary. "We want to be clear about our intentions," Richard said as we reviewed the documents. "Our goal is not to create hardship for your son and his wife. We're willing to work with them on a reasonable timeline for selling the property, or even potentially buying our share if they can arrange financing." I appreciated his directness. "My son can be difficult," I said diplomatically. "I hope you won't take it personally if he's initially hostile." Janet patted my hand. "Family situations are always complicated. We've been in this business long enough to develop thick skin." The actual signing took just 20 minutes. I received a certified check for my share of the property, minus closing costs and Frank's legal fees. It was more money than I had ever possessed at one time, the result of rapidly appreciating real estate values in the lakefront area. As I was leaving the title company, Frank pulled me aside. "One more thing, Dom. We're required to immediately notify all owners of a change in the title. I've arranged for a courier to deliver the papers to your son's house this afternoon, along with a letter from the Thompsons introducing themselves as the new co-owners." I nodded throat tight. "He's going to be furious." Frank squeezed my shoulder. You did what you had to do. Sometimes the hardest lessons are the most important ones. I spent the rest of the day in a state of nervous anticipation, expecting Marcus to call at any moment. Around 4 in the afternoon, my phone rang with an unfamiliar Chicago number. "Is this Dominic Walsh?" a woman's voice asked when I answered. "Yes, speaking." "Please hold for Marcus Walsh." There was a click, then my son's voice tight with barely controlled rage. "What have you done?" "I sold my share of the house as I told you I would," I replied calmly. "To strangers, without even giving me a chance to buy you out. You had the legal notification period to exercise your right of first refusal. You chose not to respond. Because I thought you were bluffing, I never believed you would actually do this to your own family. The same family where a son thinks it's acceptable to slap his father 20 times in front of guests." I countered, my own anger finally showing. "The same family where I'm treated as an embarrassment, someone not worthy of basic respect." "That was one mistake," Marcus shouted. "One bad night. No, Marcus. It was the culmination of years of taking me for granted, of treating me as less than. The slaps were just the physical manifestation of an attitude you've had for a long time." There was a moment of silence on the line. When Marcus spoke again, his voice was lower, threatening. "I'm calling my lawyer as soon as I hang up. I'll fight this. I'll claim you weren't of sound mind when you signed, that you were coerced." "You can try," I said wearily. "But all the paperwork is in order, witnessed and notarized. Frank made sure of that." "Frank," Marcus spat the name. "My own godfather conspiring against me. He was acting as my lawyer doing his job. And he didn't conspire against you. He followed the legal process exactly. Sophia just called me in tears." Marcus continued, changing tactics. "The Thompsons are at our house right now, measuring rooms, talking about what changes they want to make. Our house, Dad. The home where your grandchild will be born." The appeal to the coming grandchild was a low blow but effective. I felt a twinge of doubt. "They're within their rights as owners, Marcus. Just as you and Sophia are within yours to stay in your half of the property." "This isn't over," Marcus promised before hanging up. I set down the phone, hands trembling slightly. Despite my conviction that I had done the right thing, the conversation left me shaken. Was I punishing my son too harshly for one terrible mistake? But no, it wasn't one mistake. It was a pattern, a fundamental lack of respect that had been building for years. Later that evening, Frank called to update me. "Just so you know, Marcus is back in town. Apparently he flew home immediately after talking to you. There was an incident at the house." My stomach tightened. "What kind of incident?" "The Thompsons were there with their contractor discussing potential updates. Marcus arrived and became confrontational. Words were exchanged and the police were called." "Oh God," I whispered. "Was anyone hurt?" "No, nothing physical. But the officers did warn Marcus about trespassing on the Thompsons' half of the property. It's a legal gray area since they share common spaces, but essentially each owner now has the right to control access to their portion." "This is getting out of hand," I said, rubbing my forehead where a headache was forming. "It often does in these situations," Frank replied sympathetically. "But Richard Thompson called me afterward. He's still open to finding a resolution that works for everyone, including potentially selling back to Marcus if he can secure financing. And if he can't, then the property will likely be sold with the proceeds split equally. Marcus and Sophia would receive enough to buy a very nice home, just not that particular house." After hanging up with Frank, I sat in my darkened apartment, wondering if I had made a terrible mistake. I had wanted to teach Marcus a lesson about respect and consequences, not tear his life apart. But where was the line between justified consequences and vindictive punishment? Had I crossed it, I thought about calling Marcus, trying to work out a compromise, but the memory of his hands striking my face again and again held me back. Some lessons had to be learned the hard way, and perhaps this was one of them. For 3 months, I heard nothing directly from Marcus or Sophia. Through Frank, I learned that the legal situation remained tense but controlled. Marcus had indeed consulted a lawyer, but had been advised that his case for overturning the sale was weak. The Thompsons had filed for a partition action, a legal process to force the sale of the entire property, but these proceedings typically took time to work through the courts. Meanwhile, I focused on rebuilding my life. With the money from selling my share of the house, I was able to buy a comfortable 2-bedroom condo in a pleasant community for active seniors. It featured a small garden patio where I started growing tomatoes and herbs, a hobby I had always wanted to pursue. I joined a woodworking class at the community center, making friends with other retirees who shared my interest in creating things with our hands. One Tuesday afternoon, I was at my favorite coffee shop downtown, a small independent place where the baristas knew my regular order. I was reading the newspaper, enjoying a rare moment of perfect contentment, when a shadow fell across my table. "Dad." I looked up to see Sophia standing there, a hesitant smile on her face. Her pregnancy was now visible, a small but definite bump beneath her simple sundress. "Sophia," I said, surprised. "Please sit down." She slid into the chair opposite me. "I didn't expect to find you here. I was meeting a friend who canceled at the last minute." "I come here most Tuesdays," I explained. "The blueberry muffins are worth the trip." An awkward silence fell between us. Finally, Sophia spoke. "You look good, Dad. Retirement seems to agree with you." "I'm keeping busy. The new place has a workshop where I've been building furniture." I paused. "How are you feeling?" "The pregnancy, I mean." Her hand went to her stomach, a gesture as old as motherhood itself. "Good days and bad. Morning sickness lasted longer than I expected, but it's better now. We found out last week it's a boy." "Congratulations," I said sincerely. "That's wonderful news." "Marcus wanted to name him Marcus Jr.," she said with a slight eye roll. I vetoed that immediately. I chuckled despite myself. Smart move. Another silence, less awkward this time. Sophia took a sip of her tea before meeting my eyes directly. "We've had to put the house on the market. The court approved the partition action, and we can't afford to buy out the Thompsons." I nodded, unsurprised but still feeling a twinge of guilt. "I'm sorry it came to that." "Don't be," Sophia said firmly. "It needed to happen. Marcus needed a wake-up call. We've been living in a financial fantasy, trying to keep up with people who earn twice what we do." "How is he?" I asked the question I had been avoiding. Sophia sighed. "Humbled. Angry at first, then depressed. Now, I think he's finally growing up. He's been seeing a therapist dealing with some issues that go back further than either of us realized. Issues about achievement, measuring up, imposter syndrome." "I never meant to put that kind of pressure on him," I said softly. "It wasn't just you," Sophia assured me. "It was internal too, and amplified by his work environment. The financial industry can be toxic that way." She hesitated. "He asks about you. Doesn't have the courage to reach out himself yet, but he wants to know how you're doing." "Tell him I'm well," I said, "and that when he's ready to talk, really talk, I'll be here." Sophia reached across the table, squeezing my hand. "I've already found a smaller house, a 3-bedroom in a family-friendly neighborhood. Nothing fancy, but it has a nice backyard for a little boy to play in. We close next week." "That sounds perfect." "It is," she agreed. "More perfect than that showplace we've been killing ourselves to afford." And maybe, once we're settled, you might want to come for dinner. The olive branch was tentatively offered, but sincerely meant. I squeezed her hand in return. I'd like that very much. 2 weeks later, I received a text message from an unknown number. Dad, it's Marcus. Can we meet, just the two of us? We arranged to meet at a neutral location, a park halfway between our homes. I arrived early, finding a bench with a view of a small lake where ducks paddled contentedly. When Marcus approached, I almost didn't recognize him. Gone was the designer suit, replaced by jeans and a simple button-down shirt. He had lost weight, and there was a new gravity to his expression. Dad, he said, stopping a few feet away. Thank you for coming. I gestured to the space beside me. Have a seat, son. He sat, maintaining a careful distance between us. For several minutes, we watched the ducks in silence. I've been trying to figure out what to say, Marcus finally began. How do you apologize for something so inexcusable? The words "I'm sorry" seem completely inadequate. They're a start, I said quietly. I am sorry, Dad. More sorry than I can express. What I did. There's no excuse. None. I've spent months in therapy trying to understand why I was so angry, why I lashed out at the one person who has always been there for me. And have you found any answers? Marcus sighed heavily. Some. I've realized I've been running from who I really am, where I came from. Trying so hard to prove I belong in this world of wealth and status that I rejected the values you taught me. Humility, hard work, integrity. He swallowed hard. I became someone I don't like very much. Someone who would hit his own father. The person who raised you would never have done that. I agreed. But people can change, Marcus, in both directions. They can lose their way, but they can also find it again. That's what I'm trying to do, he said earnestly. Find my way back. The house was the first step, letting it go, accepting that we were living beyond our means, trying to impress people who don't really matter. He paused. The new place is smaller, but it already feels more like a home than that showcase ever did. Sophia mentioned you found a nice neighborhood. You've seen Sophia? Marcus looked surprised. We ran into each other at a coffee shop. She looks well. The pregnancy suits her. A genuine smile transformed Marcus's face. She's amazing, stronger than I am. She never got caught up in the status game like I did. She's been my rock through all this. You're lucky to have her. I know that now. He hesitated. Dad, I don't expect you to forgive me right away. What I did was unforgivable. But I'm hoping with time we might rebuild something. I want my son to know his grandfather, to learn from you the values I temporarily forgot. I studied my son's face, seeing in it echoes of the boy he had been, the man I had always hoped he would become. I sold the house to teach you a lesson, Marcus. Not about money or property, but about respect, about consequences. Lesson received, he said ruefully, loud and clear. Then perhaps it's time to move forward. I extended my hand. After a moment's hesitation, Marcus took it, and I pulled him into a hug instead. He stiffened in surprise, then relaxed his shoulders, shaking slightly with suppressed emotion. When we separated, both of us had damp eyes. I've been thinking about a business idea, I said, changing the subject to give us both a moment to compose ourselves. A small repair shop. There's a space for rent near my new place. Handyman services, furniture, restoration, that sort of thing. That sounds perfect for you, Marcus said. You've always been good with your hands. Could use some help on weekends, someone to learn the business. I gave him a sideways glance. If you're interested. A slow smile spread across Marcus's face. I'd like that. Going back to basics, working with my hands for a change instead of just numbers on a screen. It won't pay like your finance job, I warned. I'm learning there are more important things than money, Marcus replied. Like family, second chances. As we continued talking, making tentative plans for the shop, I felt a weight lifting that I hadn't realized I was carrying. The house was gone, yes. The comfortable fiction that our relationship had never faltered was also gone. But in their place was something potentially stronger, a relationship based on truth, on mutual respect, rather than obligation. 3 months later, I stood in the hospital room, looking down at my newborn grandson, sound asleep in his clear bassinet. They had named him William after my father. Sophia dozed in the hospital bed, while Marcus sat beside her, holding her hand even in sleep. "He has your chin," I whispered to Marcus, who smiled tiredly. "Poor kid." "It's a strong chin," I corrected. "A Walsh chin." Later, holding William while Marcus went to find coffee, I whispered promises to this new life. To be there for him. To teach him what I knew. But also to let him find his own way, make his own mistakes, while providing a safety net of unconditional love tempered with necessary boundaries. I had lost a house but regained a son. More importantly, I had regained my self-respect, my understanding that love doesn't mean being a doormat. It means caring enough to establish boundaries, to require respect, to allow natural consequences when those boundaries are violated. William stirred in my arms, tiny face scrunching before relaxing back into sleep. Such potential in this small being. Such hope for a new generation that might learn from our mistakes. Have you ever had to teach someone a difficult lesson about respect? Or been on the receiving end of such a lesson? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. Please hit like and subscribe if this story resonated with you, and share it with someone who might need a reminder about the importance of maintaining dignity in relationships. Life is too short to accept disrespect even from those closest to us. Thank you for listening, and until next time, remember that true love includes boundaries.